A very warm welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. You are watching The Big Idea here on Look Up TV. And today on the program, we are talking about national examinations during a pandemic. It's the first of its kind, national exams during the COVID-19 period. To help me discuss this issue this morning is Samson Mungade, who is right next to me.
Thank
My
you.
immediate left, who is an educationist. And on the far end, Patrick Mwanda, who is a teacher. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yes. So we are starting the national examinations. They're here with us.
Yeah.
And schools had been closed for 9 months.
Yeah.
Then they were opened in January. So, and we are in a rush to normalize the school calendar by 2023.
Yeah.
So just preparing for national examinations, how has it been, Patrick?
Well, thank you for having me in The Big Idea, and it's something that everyone in the country who is concerned about the education issues has to think about when you talk about preparing the exams in the times of abnormals, because honestly, there is a lot of things that surround the whole thing about education, and since last year, when we had the inception of COVID-19 in our country, there are a lot of issues that went around. For example, to think about in the exams in the times of abnormals, because honestly, there is a lot of things scrapped in July. I think, if I don't forget, that was on 20th July last year. The CAs announced that we called the 2020 academic calendar something that has been scrapped off, and it's done. That alone sets a mind to the student. How did it sound to student when you tell them the calendar has been cancelled, and then they now think that what came to their mind is that come next year, that is 2021, this year, that they're going to start afresh in the class that you were. So ideally, most students now lost touch and said, after all, we're going to repeat the whole class.
And
we
they've
have
only done one term.
Yes, and they're going to repeat the whole term. To me, I would think that one term would be a way of probably, if the government was sincere enough, it would be enough counted a loss, because the 9 years at home, really, and actually the term was not over. So we would say that that one term was cut short, so it's not over. So students were affected in a different way. And now they are now brought back in the time of uncertainty. Some of them with a lot of anxiousness in them. Some of them have suffered direct impact of COVID. They have lost their relatives, and they're here now for exams. I think it's one of the most uncertain time for exams. We can only imagine that the result will not be as frustrating as I may think, because I don't think most of students, ideally some of them are prepared, of course, but a big number of them will have a lot of challenges to face the exam. That is.
And Samson, do you think this is the right move? Right now, having national examinations, given the myriad of challenges that we have?
Well, I think to start off with, I will say I think the entire process, the way it was done, picking from where my colleague has left, is it was just a mess, because at one point we had already adjusted the students to think that the entire calendar is lost, and the entire year, academic year, is lost. But then somewhere along the way, someone just changes their mind and they say, we are going back to school at this time, at this moment. So I don't think is the best thing to have been done at such a moment as this, given we end these learners at home for around 9 months, and they were off. Some places we know they couldn't access any material, whatever kind of material to prepare for. And I think it's a challenging time. So for me, I think it's not the best move that could have been done. But now that we have it here, we'll have to face the challenge. Yes.
So, Patrick, you can tell us the kind of preparations that are happening in your school.
Well, I may not really focus on my school, but the entire nation, because probably I'm a teacher in a certain school, specific school, but then I have interacted with my colleagues in other areas, visit them, talk to them and know what is happening. Of course, like if you recall yesterday, the CAs mentioned something about the preparation for the exams. And they said that how do you expect to take the exam in this time of abnormal circumstances? That, if I recall well, he said that no exam official will be allowed in a school without a mask. We shall have designated places for sanitizing, washing our hands, and all those COVID protocols. Of course, different schools are prepared differently. But we are just trying to imagine that the preparation that are on the ground may not really be substantial for us to say we're going to fight COVID. Because I'm trying to imagine we are doing exams, and you know the model of exams that we do, they are paper. You must write on a paper. So you cannot say after every few minutes you wash your hands. When this student has done the exam, you submit definitely to the supervisors. The supervisors have nothing to sanitize the papers, to pick the papers. So ideally, yes, we may say we are prepared. We are prepared to some extent, but then I don't feel that it's enough, but we can only wish that it's going to be well for us. And all those who are going to take part in the examination process will be safe in whichever circumstance you're going to do the exam.
Okay. Yeah. And there was the assessment that was done early in January. Students went back to school. Yeah. And there was reportedly massive failure among a lot of students. So it could be one of the reasons given was due to lack of the face-to-face interaction. So going by this assessment, does this then tell of what's going to happen for the results of the national examinations?
Now, touching on the assessment, I think one of the problems we have with the Ministry of Education is a disconnection between the ministry itself and its agencies. Because if you remember well, the people who are doing the assessment is NEC, which is the mandated body to carry out the examinations and the likes. But then after that, the CS was bashing them, saying the report was wrong. You know, he had some issues with the report, like the massive failure and all that. So, but I think that report, to me, in as far as it may not be the most outright or right thing, it is an indicator of what we should expect. Because, of course, when NEC does it, they were doing it in perspective of what the students have been doing and what they expect them to be doing at such a time. So, yes, I believe it's just an indicator of what we should be expecting in these exams, now given the level of preparedness that the student have had. Because remember, in as far as we're talking about being prepared, for a student is more psychological than we are talking of any other thing. So if their minds are off, of course they've been affected by whatever has been happening, either directly or indirectly, and then they have not been given even time to recover emotionally and psychologically, then we should expect really not so good news from the exams. Yeah.
Yes, and Patrick, now that the exams are going on anyway, so given the time that students were at home for such a long time, would it be such a big deal if we just skipped the whole academic year and just restart again?
To me, I think to some extent there is the effect of skipping the academic year, but then the effect worth compared to what may come up when we rush over the academic calendar. To me, I would say the effect of rushing over the academic calendar are more than what we may experience if we would have scrapped it off completely. Because, truth be said, our country is not in short of manpower. If we forgo 1 year without the exams, I do not see a scenario where we shall have crisis on in the job market. In any case, it would be another advantage of, first of all, pushing those who are flooding the market to employ them. But we seem to have some hidden things at the back, because I don't know why the rush, because we would have given a student, because these guys, they are doing something. For example, I'm trying to imagine a Form 4 who is doing an exam that in our country and our prevailing academic issues, that the Form 4 exam is the main determiner of how the community perceives you and where you land in the next many years that will come. Because it's a very important certificate that a Form 4 that any scholar in the country will have. And we are now making it's a rush. What for? Because I'm trying to imagine a Form 4 in 5 or 3 years to come, they will have excuse. They will have excuse as to why
they will blame these national examinations.
You guys have never done exam like we did. We did in a situation whereby we didn't have time to read. We had issues of corona, stigma, and all those things. And we even did the exam with a lot of tension in the school, because you told, don't sit close to a friend, don't do this, don't do this. When someone falls sick, there's a lot of stigma in the whole school and panic. So they'll have excuse to say That is why. And I'm just trying to imagine after the results are out, the criteria they will use now to admit students who are not willing to own their results. Because to some extent, some of them will not own those results.
And we will be coming to that shortly. But there have been arguments that younger people are easily adjustable to situations. So could this be now the reason that now taking them back and rushing to fulfill and get the calendar back to normal by 2023 would still be ideal?
I don't think really that was the driving force behind it. We must call it out for what it is. Of course, by looking at the way things have been done and rushing at everything, and looking at it from a perspective of an education sector, it means, of course, they were bypassing some processes that they knew could affect the learners. So the issue is not about them being young and able to adjust, because we should also look at the shock that they are going through from the COVID, from whatever the environment that they have been in for 9 months, being out of class and all that. So I think this is just an excuse, saying that these are young people, that they can really adjust. Because again, look at it, the time that they've gone back to school. How many months have we given them to acclimatize, to adjust? And this is just a natural process. It doesn't have, you don't need to be a psychologist or anything to know this, to understand that when there is a shift in any part of the body, be it to be mental or even the physical part of the body, you have to give yourself time to recover first. So really, we are doing justice to these learners, because in as far as you're saying they are easy to adjust, we have not given them the opportunity to heal from whatever they have gone through, the trauma, the loss of the academic, and then the wrong interactions they have had, of course, outside the classroom. So I don't think that one is the right excuse. It's just an excuse, but it's not the right way.
Doesn't hold much water.
It doesn't hold much water.
Yeah, you want to add something?
Probably to hand on what my colleague has said, I think there is a lot of theoretical approach on some issues.
Yeah.
Because you cannot just sit and say a young person is quick at readjusting. That is the theoretical approach of it. But you have to ask ourselves, this is a student who has been at home for 9 months. Where have they been? We are thinking that all students are in a setup whereby there is someone citing them to read. That is the assumption we are likely to do, that there is someone to tell them this is what's happening, this is not what should we be doing. But then we have to ask ourselves, this is someone who's been at home for 9 months, subject to a lot of issues out there, subject to the drugs, subject to teenage pregnancies and all those things. And we've brought them back again on rush. They have already undergone through some stigma in the community. They have undergone through some changes. They have been you realize that if you visit the local joint in the villages, for instance, where I come from, there is this joint that people tend to consume somewhere. If you visit those joints, you realize that quite a number of students from 4s and from 3s who are now becoming masculine, and they would feel we can interact with these aged people. You pick this student on a very immediate thing and you tell them, go back to class, do the exam. We do not give them time to recover from those issues, and we expect they will perform like any other student. I think, to me, as much as you're taking the exam, we have to accept, and I think the government is ready to take such issues into account when you get the results.
Okay, and you mentioned pregnancies. We last year we didn't have exams. Now we're having them this year. But in 2019 registered the most number of pregnancies for candidates. And we saw the CS at the time, Amina, trying to say that even if you got pregnant, you still can come back and do your national examinations. So for this year, in this very rushed exam period, has such an issue been factored in?
One, I think, like my colleague has said, we have kind of an habit of doing things based on theories, and these are presumed theories again, instead of going the scientific way. You know, it's very funny that we in the education system that we should be holding in high regard research, but then nobody's bothering about research. So I think for me, that one has not been factored, because to date we don't have a report. We don't have any statistics pointing to the number of pregnancies among the candidates, or even the school going, just in general, the school going students. So one, we don't have a report to that effect. Maybe it will come out later, or maybe it may never come out. But looking at it and the way things have been, of course, we expect the numbers should be also quite high. And that's just one part. The second part, we should also be looking at, of course, there is a number of students who may never get to do the exams. Looking at what is happening, like places like the Rift Valley, where we have issues with the lakes rising and the schools and all this. So I think these are just effects that, again, we hope the government will address in the process as we proceed. But they are really going to be high cases, and then they are going to impact, of course, at the overall results of the exams.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Patrick, you are a teacher, and teachers have been greatly affected during this COVID-19 pandemic period. We have seen teachers lost their jobs. They got into completely different businesses. Motorbike business, farming, and many others. So now that they're back to school, not all of them, but now the ones that are back to school, is there any help in terms maybe psychologically that you have been given?
Well, it's from the public domain. We may think there's something big done to teachers to bring them back. Like, remember when we were resuming back to school with Form 4s in September, there was a lot of hype statement on how the government will come in and help the student to settle school, help the teacher to settle to school, and the teachers were called 2 weeks earlier to go back to school so that they can get used to the new environment. You are now left asking yourself, does going to the same institution you were and just doing the things normally that you'll be doing help you in recovery? Of course, no. To me, I would say we focus so much on student and forgot that the main driver of academic issues in school must be a teacher. Some have been affected differently, like those who are in the private sectors. Probably those in the government sectors may not have been affected
as much.
Such, but those who are in private sectors, I imagine when the schools were closed, some of the employers took advantage and said, we are now out. It's not our wish, no payment. Even the very month that we closed schools, that is on March, some are not even paid. And then a teacher goes home for 9 months without a single coin. Remember, they have been used to that kind of lifestyle. They get some cash at the end of the month.
Yeah,
but this time now,
salary.
they have nothing for themselves. They are now left to go back to the villages, do a few things in the village to get some coin, go to boda industry, go to other things like wedding in the market. And the same teacher who had set a class for herself in the school, you interact with the student in the village, you are now a boda guy. And you now come back to school, and you expect the same student, you are just riding with him, boda in the village, to have a different perception. Ideally, it would take some time before that mentality is scrapped and bring back the dignity of the
There's a little
class.
bit of humiliation on the teacher's part.
Yeah.
So that has not really been factored in.
Not at all.
Yes, Samson.
So I think to just push something in between there, again, I think when the teachers were called back to school, we saw what kind of activities they were doing, sweeping classes, clearing the bushes in the compound, doing all manner of things, because they are there, it's 2 weeks, you are in school, but then students are not there. Of course, you have to prepare for the students to come. So I think it's very funny. I don't know what the ministry meant when they says teachers to go back and prepare first, like 2 weeks before, whether they meant to go and prepare physically or to prepare for what. But again, I think, like I've always said, there's always a disconnect between the policy makers and the implementers on the ground. So that you find the people at the ministry, maybe at the ministerial level, they are thinking their own things, they put it into paper, but then again, they don't follow to see that it has been implemented, because logically what I could have expected is get these teachers back to school, have maybe a counselor, a professional counselor, talk to them, not necessarily even a professional counselor, we have the clergy, we have programs that can be run, just kind to shift their minds to come back. Remember, these are people who have also been out for 9 months, some of them without pay. Even the TSC ones who are being paid, it's okay, they're being paid, but again, remember their mind has already adjusted and moved out. Some have also lost their loved ones. They have issues with their families, because now you find also you have hand issues with the family, the violence, the whatever that happens in the family. So many issues. So we could have expected that the government should do some semblance of counseling, not even go much into it, but something that resembles that, just to push the teachers back to the normal state of mind.
Because then wellness is more important.
Yes. But then we got them back and gave them physical work to do. Go sweep classes, cut the fences, do this, trim the flowers. I really think it's we are jokers to some extent.
I hope the government is watching and listening.
Probably, I want to disown something, probably. On a light note, I want to disown that we didn't sweep the schools.
How did you then prepare?
Well, we are going to go back and prepare for the arrival of students. That is why probably I'm saying there is a I will probably resonate with what my friend has said. There is a disconnect between the policymakers and the implementers. Of course, in their own wisdom, I'm sure they wanted us to go back to prepare something. But there was a communication breakdown. What are you preparing? So we found ourselves going to school. Fine, we're in school. What are you doing? We just sit in the staff room. Of course, there are those records that are the professional document you prepare. Of course, you prepare 1 or 2 days. You set them in order. But given we were coming from the COVID pandemic holiday, we were supposed to prepare something specifically on COVID issues. But what did you come back to do? Just to prepare the normal document, to prepare like teachers, prepare class note, prepare lesson plans, schemes of work, and as such. Ideally, to me, I think we just didn't do anything that is out of the normal routine of a teacher. There's nothing we did different, actually, apart from just coming to school, talking, how was your holiday, how was this, then you're told by your head, prepare this and this, and then specifically on COVID, I think the normal classroom teacher prepared nothing. Unless now the administration that came in now to prepare things like the sanitation point to sanitize, they also prepare the washing points and also prepare something on the dorm areas and the boarding areas and as such. But the normal classroom teacher, there is nothing we prepared apart from the normal things we do normally when we don't have such issues of corona.
And what about the awareness now when the students come back to school? How much of that did you do?
Of course, a teacher acts like a parent at the same time. We have a teacher and a parent. We have the understanding that the student had gone through a lot of trauma out there. In our own ability, in our own wisdom, there are things we did, like we prepare, bring them back to school. We know each student at a time. We know where they come from. At least we take time to know each of them. Although we may not know all of them, my friend knows one, I know the other one. So at least when they came back, we had to bring them back to school. Of course, the first day they arrived, there was that sensitization on how they should carry themselves throughout the stay in school. At least still tell them it's not over. Yes, we're out of the COVID issues. We are from home with a lot of uncertainties, a lot of problems. But we have to bring them back to school, settle them. With our little probably the psychology we've learned, we were able to bring them back to school. But I would have thought a scenario whereby the government and the general education sector in the country would have chipped in a different style, bring in different people who would have given different concepts. Because we teachers, we've lived with students.
Yeah. Because the situation now is different.
Formed a mind about me.
Yeah.
So at times I may say things and they ignore them. At times, I may not really be at a point whereby I can drive the sense that is required to them, so at least I can calm them down. Of course, we had all the problems, the teething problem of coming back to school. Challenges were there, but to some extent, young people have settled in a way, but then challenges are still there.
Okay. Yes. And I want us to talk about vaccination of teachers, but we'll be coming in with that after the break. We are taking a short break here on The Big Idea, but we want you to engage with us. Do not go too far. Welcome back. You're watching The Big Idea here on Look Up TV. And today in the program, we are talking about national examinations during a pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And the big question we are asking you, what is your idea of having the national exams during the pandemic? Is it time? Was it rushed? We want you to engage with us. The SMS number is 20374. And with me on set, in my immediate left, Samson Mungadia, educationist, and on the far left is Patrick Monda, who is a teacher. Just before the break, I had a little bit talked about vaccination. So vaccination of teachers. Teachers are among our frontliners. And so I would really just want to engage you, Patrick. The vaccination. Have you been vaccinated? Has it started in your school or around the area?
Well, I would probably want to give it a broader approach of it all, because I'm trying to look at it, the number of vaccines that we've just received in our country, how many are they, and how many teachers do we have. From there, we ask ourselves, are we starting with teachers? Of course, no. The priority would be on the medical fraternity. Well, this being a personal issue about vaccination, and I remember the president himself said that it's on voluntary.
Yeah.
It's not, there is no one who is being coerced to do it. Teachers may be vaccinated, but at the moment, it hasn't reached to schools. I think the government so much centered on, first of all, dealing with the medical fraternity, vaccinating the nurses, the pharmacists, the medics, and all those. I'm hoping soon they will come to the education sector, and of course, if they come to the education sector, they will definitely start with teachers. But it's purely informed on one decision, not on coercion. To me, as an individual, I have no problem on someone who makes a decision to be vaccinated, and someone who chooses to abstain from it. It's personal decision. Yeah.
But we have seen the TSC CEO, Nancy Macharia, leading by example. She got the jab herself. Does this encourage you to go ahead and get vaccinated?
Of course, it's a good predecessor, and at least she has set a good prerequisite for the teaching fraternity to join. I think that is good, and I think that every leaders in different sectors, they would have a militant way of doing things, because probably we have different theories revolving around the vaccine. Kenyans are yet to gain that trust on the vaccine. The AstraZeneca vaccine that is being used in our country has got a lot of theories revolving around the world about, like Denmark.
It has been banned in several countries.
In that sense, normal Kenyans would want to probably to have some fear of the unknown. They wouldn't wish to subject themselves until they have seen the people they imagine are their pace setters taking part into it. The fact that she has taken that step of taking the jab, I think that was okay. She has at least set the example for everyone in the teaching fraternity. I think it is a good example she has done to the whole sector of education.
Okay, and now teachers are on the front line to be vaccinated. Yeah. So what about the students?
I think number one, we should also look at it from a perspective of where we are as a country in terms of vaccination. Because I think as at 3 days ago, we were less than 10,000 vaccinations. That's we are focusing on healthcare workers, of course. We hadn't reached 10,000 for the entire period that we've been doing the vaccinations. Now look at our neighbors. A country like Rwanda has done 250,000 the same period again. So we need to ask ourselves, what modality are we using? Because looking at it, if we can't do with the medical fraternity that they are within the same system that is doing the vaccination, now bring it to the education sector, whereby you're going to be looking for teachers in far-flung areas, very far away, to do the vaccination. So again, I think it comes back to the basic question of how long will it take? Of course, now we don't even have to think about the students first, because it's a long story, it's a long time. We are talking of doing it 75% by 2023, around 3 years down the line, we'll have done 75% of the population. So that one should tell you that students are nowhere being counted near that, because I expect after we are done with the medical, we go to teachers, then we go to security forces. We have seen maybe the army doing it. So it's a long way to go for the students. It's not an easy thing. Given we are not even able to give them masks of 5 shillings, we don't expect them to get the vaccination anytime soon. Yeah.
Okay. And so now students interacting in school, maybe Patrick, you can tell us, are they following the guidelines, the protocols, the COVID-19 guidelines given by the Ministry of Health?
Well, as a teacher in the school, we have different responsibilities we are supposed to execute, and overseeing the directive by the ministry. Actually, we're the implementers of the directive. But then we have to ask ourselves, we are in school. For instance, we're in a remote area or in slum setup now, where a student comes in with other issues from home. A student comes and tells you, I missed that 10 bob to buy a mask. You're left now torn in between the line. Do you tell him or her, go back to school, go back home, get the mask, or you still stay with the kid? Of course, they are trying as much as they can, but then to me, I would say the execution of the whole thing is close to less than half of the expectation. Yes, because we left the whole thing entirely to the kids. There is no effort being made by education stakeholders to help the kids to acquire these issues. And I think this one brings us to some point identifying some of the gaps we have in our policies. We have some of gaps that we have in our policies on what do we focus on when we come to implementing of some of the things. For example, when we come to the wearing of mask, social distancing, we are now left to ask ourselves, are we able to provide those masks to the kids? Of course, no, we are not. A mask that cost 5 bob, we aren't able to provide. If the government itself is not able to provide, it's very hard for you to force a kid go back home, buy the same. A parent comes and asks you, Mwalimu, serikali yezi nunua hizi mask. Where do you expect us, who are struggling even to bring food on the table with these economic times that we have, do we expect us to give the 10 bob to buy a mask daily? Of course, we have a lot of issues that are hanging in terms of implementing those policies, but of course the teachers and the involved parties are doing the best they can, but then we have the challenges that we cannot run away from. We cannot run away from that fact that there is quite a number of challenges that are there.
Okay. And now let us look at what the COVID-19 has exposed within our school system. For instance, infrastructure. Now that we have to have the physical distancing, and even for national examinations, there's always the spacing during examinations. But we have overcrowding in so many schools. And the CS once said that they could now, if it means studying under a tree, then so be it. Let us take that route. But now, infrastructure in our schools, it has continued to be a very big issue. So are we finally going to address it thanks to COVID-19?
I don't think we're going to address it thanks to COVID-19 because one, we have a culture as a nation, and particularly the political class, of taking things in a pedestrian way. Because when someone talks about the infrastructure, we have had 9 months during which students were at home. Now the question comes, how many classes were constructed in those 9 months? Of course, close to none. How many maybe the dormitories were constructed during that time? Close to none. We are talking of desks again. The government gave out money and everything, but to date there are schools that have not gotten maybe even a single desk because of either the distribution challenges or maybe the finances were not adequate. So one, the issue of infrastructure in this country in learning institution is a big issue that should not be looked even at the perspective of COVID-19. It should be a long-term plan by the education stakeholders and particularly the government, because it requires the goodwill. Because you can imagine there are some places in this country where you find a school that has maybe from 1 to Form 4, it has only 3 classes or 4 classes, built structures. I've been to primary schools whereby they have from nursery school all the way to class 8, but then the built structures, they are like maybe 4 or 3. So this issue of telling people go and study under trees, now the question comes, we are in a season of rains and all these issues, where do they go? So we have to face the reality, not hide behind anything and say, Corona has made students to learn under trees. These are issues that have been there. So the government must shoulder the responsibility and make it a long-term plan to do the infrastructures in the education system, particularly when we're looking at going towards the CBC, that will be requiring a lot of space, a lot of all those other infrastructures that are needed. So it's a question of government's commitment. It's not a question of whether COVID has forced us to look into it.
So this has always been an issue.
This is not a COVID issue. COVID will come and go. It's only that COVID has exposed it in a big way.
Probably, just to mention on the same issue, But let me just respond on something I said about the CS talking about studying the trees. I just want to imagine it was just taken on a different twist. The CS probably was on a lighter note trying to emphasize on the creativity of teachers. That's notwithstanding. Let's look at how has COVID exposed our preparedness on various issues. When we talk about how has COVID done this, we are likely more often than not to look into the infrastructural part of it.
Yeah.
But then there are other broader issues that we need to look into. For instance, what is the teacher-student ratio in our schools? COVID has really exposed the imminent problem that has always been affecting our schools. You realize that probably if you visit the well-developed private schools like Napeponi, the M-Pesa, I happen to have toured M-Pesa sometimes back, and we realize as a class has got around 26 students each class. That tells you the teacher-to-student ratio is quite favorable. Go back to public schools. You meet a class with 70 students, one teacher. Ideally, how we can achieve the education objectives in this class cannot be imagined, because you can imagine a teacher handling 70 students. It is expected that the teacher know the problem of each and every student in this class, address those issues at personal level. I think we've been facing this problem, and we have never gotten to a point we can address this issue. The shortage of manpower in our country in the sector of education is something that we have literally shelved it, and we've never mentioned about it. But with COVID, to me, I would probably say something that in a descent of frustrations, there is some oasis of hope somewhere. To me, I think COVID has come as some set of hope to those of us who think the education sector has been neglecting some issues which are very core to the running of it.
So it even act as a reminder
Yes,
of what we have been
actually,
neglecting for a very long
exactly.
time.
Yeah. To me, I think COVID, thanks to COVID, as much as we are crying about it, it is exposing something that we have always undersaid it, and we never mentioned about it. We have always shelved and said, anytime we talk about employment of teachers, anytime teachers come out to agitate for their rights, for more the poor working conditions, everyone used to say, walimu waende shule tuongee mambo. But then at least now with the COVID, every parent has been able to see the gaps that we have in the sector. The government itself, though they may not say this one publicly, they have been able to identify some of the gaps that they have always shelved and assumed them in the education sector.
Yeah. And what about ICT? Because ICT then came to life during the pandemic when schools were closed down, and so students had to study via different social media platforms. And then that was a challenge, not only for the students who could not maybe access the devices and the gadgets, but for the teachers as well, who have not even been well exposed. They could not even find their way around. Sometimes I had stories of teachers, for the first 40 minutes, they're just hustling to get their face right on the camera, just to operate a tablet, a laptop. So the ICT sector.
So I think for one, we have to appreciate the ICT as a ministry. Of course, they tried the best that they could. But again, to me, this is like climbing a tree from the top. Because look at it this way. When Corona came, we end to hide. Of course, the government end to hand at the guise of we are going to provide education through these channels, maybe the TV channels that they gave, through the Zoom and all these things. But then, truth be told, what percentage of the country is connected to the network grid? Very, very minimal. Now, then number two, there is the issue of being tech savvy. How many students can access phones that can access maybe a Zoom or any kind of an app that can be used to teach? Again, it's an issue. How many schools have those platforms to do it? Either a computer that can have a webcam and all those for a teacher to teach. Again, very few. So I think as far as you want to tout that ICT came into place and assistant to do a lot, and I've heard stories about this, that students were being taught, they were learning, they were doing this. But I think the entire thing is a works. ICT tried their best, but then it didn't achieve as much because, of course, of infrastructural challenges that were there, and they couldn't override them. Like students having no access to internet, students having no access to smartphones, or maybe good laptops or good TVs that can connect to the digital waves. So I think let's credit the ICT sector, but again, we need to look at it at a deeper level and try to understand how do we do it. Because we find it was a challenge even for universities to implement.
Yeah.
They have the manpower, they have the knowledge, the know-how, and then now you're going to take it to a primary school teacher who doesn't even have the knowledge of the basic computer packages to come and implement something, to go and teach a kid who has not been even exposed to how to start a computer. Again, it becomes a problem. So I think ICT did good work, but then we should not hide behind it. We didn't perform as they want to portray it to be.
Patrick, and especially for students and pupils who are in remote areas, because those in the urban could at least manage, even go to a cyber, but there are those who are in remote areas where they had zero access. Yeah.
Looking at it from the point of the remote areas and urban areas, is likely to probably close some concept of understanding how we have faced the challenge of ICT. Because as much as those people or students living in urban can access the internet and they have cybers, we have to look into it. Does having the internet and having cyber automatically leads to accessing of the information? No. Because we have to look at it. We are limited in terms of our financial abilities on how much we can get from the ICT sector. If we have to download materials, there is cost that is attached to it. A student able to do that, a student is living in Nairobi, Kibera, slums, whereby putting food on the table is a problem. They have the internet here, they have the cybers around, but they cannot afford the financial requirement that is required to get those materials. That's being a challenge to those living in town. Of course, a few of them can access, the few, the elite class and a few who are able financially can do that. Going back to the village, I think that is one of the biggest gap that we have in terms of how we presented our issues in the education sector. Because if you go back to the village, we are now left asking ourselves, the government came in and said we shall provide some platform like radios, like TV stations, and we are left wondering now, fine, you're hearing some information on K24, just for example. Are we aware that there's some extreme head in the villages where even accessing a TV is a problem? Where even the signal of that TV is a problem?
Does not exactly
Even
work.
even the TV itself doesn't exist.
If let's assume that they have the TV, the signal is a problem.
Yeah.
I think that one now challenges the government and everyone involved in such issues of ICT and integration of different perspective or issues in the education on where should we prioritize. Next, it also gives us some sense of how do we prepare our manpower? How do we train our teachers? When we went home for the first few weeks, there was that concept of teaching students through Zoom. And we were left now asking, how many teachers even know about Zoom? Leave alone the student now. How many teachers know about the Zoom? How many teachers did the government take time to integrate a teachers to such platform like Zoom, the Google classes, and all those things? Ideally, even if we do national statistics, those teachers who can comfortably integrate ICT in teaching are close to less than 10%.
So there's still a gap when it comes
a
to
big gap,
our education system and embracing technology. So then the ICT again, of course. And now, given these challenges that we have, and now that exams are going to go on anyway, students were at home, some violent homes, abusive homes, given in that period. And this could definitely have an effect on the exams that they're about to start. So now, when it comes to the results, when the results are out, there's admissions, and then there's also the marking. So will the marking for these exams be a little more lenient, given the challenges have been more than they usually are? Yes, Samson.
For one, I think I may not authoritatively talk about the marking because it's undertaken by an entity that is mandated to do so.
Yeah.
But I want to assume, normally that is what they do, they're standardizing the exams based on the performance and to ensure that no one is in the far extreme. So I can only hope that they're going to be fair in standardizing the exams factoring in the environment that the exams have been done in and whatever the learners have been through before the exams. So I can only hope that they're going to consider that when standardizing the exams. But at the base of it, obviously students are being disadvantaged. Whether we do standardization or we don't do standardization, at the end of the day, there are those students who could have performed better, but they won't perform given the circumstances and the environment that they have been in. And for them, we can only hope that somehow they find their way out. But at the end of the day, I hope the examination council is going to be very fair in ensuring that they distribute the marks in a way that reflects the challenges that are in the system.
Okay. Patrick, is there a way, instead of half a mark, you just give it a full mark?
Now, we want to look at it in a broader perspective. What is the purpose of the exam?
Yeah.
When we are administering exam to students or to anyone, apart from just the normal exams for high school level and probably the primary school level, any exam is meant to test your ability in a certain field. When we talk about probably being lenient and awarding of marks, we are probably, to me, I would think we might be preparing another crisis. Because when we start now betting on some of the issues like marking, we are ready to produce a task or work, a force that is workforce to the field that is not really informed on their ability, but is informed on our empathy because they went through Corona period. So to me, I think let the exam be marked the normal way of marking, but probably now on admission to different courses, that they now factor such issues like how they will affect. But on the exam, let's get the true reflection of who the student is. Let them get their B, let them get their C, let them get their D. But then when we come now to admission of such student in schools, we now probably can factor issues of Corona. But on marking, if we start now betting on marking and being lenient, we are saying we want to create a different crisis, because on the process of marking, of course there are those rules followed during the marking of the exams. Yeah. On the process of marking, we expect students should be specific on how they are answering the question. If they do not know, let us know they do not know. If we become lenient on marking, we're going to produce some A's. Someone comes out with an A and he thinks I'm equal to doing medical courses. We release the same doctor to the field in the next 5 years. What will we be facing? Would you remember we had Corona?
So right now we go in and face the exam, and then we meet at the admissions. That's what you want.
Well, of course, that is a way of thinking, but probably there is a way government can try to come in and address that issue in the long run. But then directly on the exam, to me, I think we may affect our future probably. Okay.
Yeah. And now that we are not certain of when the COVID-19 virus is going to end, we could be like this even come next year. So are we now prepared in terms of our school calendar, just in case we have to leave school again? Is the government now prepared for potential disasters, potential pandemics?
Once again, I think, we can't say whether the government is prepared or not, because they're decision makers who are involved in that. Yeah. But we want to believe they're prepared for that. But looking at Corona itself, the way it is and everything, we can only say that we're in the wounds. We are not out of the wounds yet. We have a long way to go. Most likely, people are talking of up to 2023, others predicting up to 2025. Because if history teaches us anything, we look back at the Spanish flu, the thing that killed almost, the normal estimated killed a quarter of human population on Earth by then, in 2 years' time. So again, looking at this and the crises that have come with the vaccine and the mistrust in the vaccine and all these other issues surrounding it, we are in it for the long run. So we can only hope that the government is ready. But at the end of the day also, I believe we should also be prepared as individuals psychologically. You're a parent, prepare your children. You're a caregiver, you're a teacher, prepare the learners, so that they have agile minds. They know if anything comes down and we have to shut again, this is how we are going to do it. So we can only play a role, each one of us, the small role that we play. Let's prepare these children, these learners who are going to be in school. They should be prepared for anything, any eventuality.
So just to be flexible. Yeah. Yes. One last word as we finish.
I would say let us cross the bridge when we get there. We may not do a prediction at the moment how the government is preparing. I'm hoping in their own mind and their own wisdom, they are preparing for something. But then, to me, I would say, we have to start now selling the idea of everyone readjusting himself or herself to living with COVID. We don't know when it is going, how long will it take, when the next wave is coming, the 4th wave or the 5th wave or the 6th wave. I think it's high time now we start preparing everyone and education sector and everybody across the country that we have to readjust and know how to live the new normal. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for being part of this discussion. And we have come to the end of the big idea. And it is indeed a challenge to the education sector, given that we are having the national examinations during the COVID-19 pandemic that is very uncertain. But the exams have to be done, and we'll be following and keeping you up to date of when and as they unfold. That is it from the big idea from me and my very able panelist. Thank you for watching.